My Combat Control Training Experience, Chapter 6 Survival, Evasion, Resistance, Escape, Fairchild Air Force Base, Spokane, Washington. As I looked out the window of the American Airlines Airbus, down at the landscape far below me, I was watching it change from the half-green, half-brown Texas landscape to the brown, jagged landscape of the Rocky Mountain region of the United States. Through the wispy clouds far below, the diverse landscape, most of it I've never seen before, was changing right before my eyes. Above me was only a crisp blue sky that would eventually turn black in the vast expanse of space. The thought of going high enough to reach past the limits of the atmosphere made me uneasy, as did the thought of flying to Washington State, a place that seemed foreign to a guy like me that grew up in the Southeast. My inner normal was already off in my head somewhere over Wyoming or Colorado as I looked at the huge mountains that were much larger than the ones in Tennessee. I was tired, but I didn't sleep. I could never really sleep on airplanes, so I just stared out the window and thought about survival school. I wasn't nervous about going. I was actually excited because I'd heard the school wasn't that hard. It couldn't have been that hard if I was still healing from a broken leg, but the instructors told me I could finish up the healing process there and then return back to airborne school. I was scared of the thought of jumping again after what happened, but I tried to push it out of my mind and instead focus on what would be a fun experience in the wilderness. I had changed a lot already in the intense training pipeline. It wasn't that the training necessarily changed me, but it brought a lot of my strengths out, mainly being determined and strong-willed. I also had more courage than I previously given myself credit for. Putting the label of combat control on me gave people a chance to immediately understand what type of person I was, simply because of the nature of the profession. Instead of being the shy, quiet guy in high school and college, which didn't help my odds with women, no matter how attractive I might have been, women were attracted to the type of guy in combat control, like they were with the professional athletes. The qualities and dedication that it takes to do these sorts of things will always be of high attraction with women. My experience with women changed as I immersed into combat control. After only a few months, I had just left Texas and also a girl I'd probably never see again, and I was perfectly okay with that. I met an attractive blonde girl who was in training to be a survival SERE instructor just before I left San Antonio. She was a fit former gymnast who had abs that were probably better than my own, and she had walked up to me wearing civilian clothes at the bar across the street from the barracks. She had walked up to me, started talking, and before I knew it, I was sneaking into her room late at night. I had almost overslept that morning, which was my first day of joining the other cones, Martin, and the new team, for the weekly AFSOC fitness test, which was a 1-mile swim, max pull-ups, push-ups, and sit-ups, and a 3-mile run. I had stumbled over to the schoolhouse, but I was still a bit drunk from the night before, although I really didn't care. After the 1,500-meter swim, my head was spinning, and by the time I was halfway through the 3-mile timed run, I was throwing up on the side of the track. I was still able to run it in 20 minutes, probably because I just had the night of my life hours before. In the beautiful forests of western Washington, there was already a chill in the September air, much more crisp than it would have been back in Tennessee. I'd finally arrived at SERE training at Fairchild Air Force Base. The Washington landscape was the most beautiful scenery I had ever seen in person. The evergreen trees were so big they seemed fake. The leaves on the deciduous trees were already changing for fall. My leg was not 100% healed, but I felt I could manage. We were rucking around with light gear compared to our normal CCT rucks. 5 days in the woods with 2 MREs, which were meals ready to eat. Basically 2 meals and a white rabbit we carried around in a sack. Martin and I were in a group of pilots and navigators wandering around finding berries, bugs, and setting tiny snares for wild animals. I've never gone that long without eating. I enjoyed food, and it was my comfort, like alcohol. It was more than fuel to me. I had no luck with the snares I set, although a few guys did. I blew through my 2 meals already and was starving. I saw Martin pull out his Red Man chew like my grandfather used to chew as he stuck a big wad in his mouth. Martin looked satisfied with his goofy grin on his baby face. Again he offered me some. He had been constantly offering me some since we met. I finally took him up on his offer, but it was one of the biggest mistakes of my life. Sure, why not? I said. I was nervous about getting sick like I was before I tried alcohol just a few years before. I grabbed a wad of the moist brown leaves, acting like I knew what I was doing. As I pulled it out, I smelled the familiar smell of raisins like with my grandfather. He used to chew the same brand when I was younger, having a 2-liter empty Pepsi bottle with him on the couch full of chew spit. I stuck the wad cautiously in my mouth. An intense wave of relaxation swept over me, a feeling I chased for years after, and I wondered why I'd held off so long trying tobacco at the time. My morale was boosted. I could go days without eating, and I could stay in the woods forever. Martin conveniently had plenty of pouches along for the excursion, and he gave me my own before I asked. We walked around most of the daytime hours looking for food that we rarely found, and set up camp at night. After getting over the initial hunger of having no food, it was not bad at all. The hunger actually faded. I looked forward to my new addiction, popping in some tobacco when bored or talking at night at the camp. I was already looking for the first buzz. It came sometimes, but sometimes I felt nauseous from too much. That did not stop me from reaching for it often. My leg was holding up fine. It still hurt to run too long, but the rucks were light and the pace was slow. We were there with pilots and navigators, so it could not be anywhere near as intense as the nightmares I'd already lived. We were out in the beautiful Washington landscape for 5 days. I took in the beauty as much as I could in between learning all the information being thrown our way. It got cold at night, down in the 30s, and warmed up perfectly in the day. There were no clouds or rain to block the sunshine, which made it even more beautiful. I still could not help but feel out of place, feeling too far west, feeling like I was on the wrong side of the earth. The last night of the survival portion, the group was allowed to grab the white rabbit out of the green bag we had been feeding and carrying around for 5 days. It was time to kill it and eat a meal. I was getting hungry just thinking about it. I did not care what we were going to eat. There was a bit of discussion on how the rabbit would be killed. The SERE instructor did not care how we did, but one of us had to do something. It didn't take long for Martin to grab a stick and smack it over the head. I turned my head away. Once the rabbit was dead, we skinned it and prepared it to cook over the fire. Martin did most of the work, sharing his tips and tricks to the group. The rabbit tasted wonderful, which kind of surprised me. Nothing was wasted. Even the brain and eyeballs were prepared in a soup. I did not have any eyeballs, but I tasted the brain. We did not waste any of it, and we fed everyone. We were not full, but I felt satisfied. The next exercise was the evasion portion of the course. We're going to be out in the woods for 3 days with an MRE and try to evade the enemy. We were in some make-believe country, and it was like being on a movie set. The enemies were dressed in tattered clothes and carried assault rifles. Many of their faces were covered, wrapped with a shirt, and they even spoke another language. I enjoyed the time alone. This was the one time we were alone by ourselves in the whole training exercise, setting up a camp with a poncho and spending time in the solitude. The mission was simple. We would roam around the forest as quietly as possible and not get spotted and captured by the enemy. It was like an intense game of hide and seek. I heard an AK-47 firing in the distance, then silence. I laid on the ground underneath some brush. I had a few close encounters with the enemy, but I had no problem hiding and kept myself from being caught. It sounded like another pilot may have been spotted. I heard lots of shouting in a foreign language and again more firing. Someone was getting caught for sure. The sound of the AK echoed off the hills. I decided to stay put and not move. I felt bad for the pilot and navigators. They wanted to fly and be in airplanes. This was not anything they wanted to do, but it was a requirement for them, just like it was for combat controllers and pararescuemen. I lay there for several hours underneath the brush. I almost fell asleep, but I heard some movement around me. There was a sound of twigs breaking and something large moving through the woods. It sounded like an elephant. I raised myself up a little to catch a view. It was a guy in a flight suit. He was a bigger guy, slightly pudgy, with close-shaved hair and a bald spot on top. In the quiet of the sneaky atmosphere, he sounded like a yeti barreling through the brush. I saw more movement around me. The enemies, who were all around me, started surrounding the poor pilot. He had no clue. He was walking with a dumb look on his face like he was ready for a hotel room. The enemy started yelling, and the pilot jumped with surprise. The guns pointed and constant screaming. The guy instantly got on the ground and surrendered. Another one was caught. I lay there silently for hours. I heard the voice over a handheld radio I was carrying throughout the challenge. I occasionally heard chatter on the radio, names of the navigators and pilots who were captured and taken to a camp. I did not hear any talk about Martin or any of the pararescue men there with us being captured. Eventually, even for those not caught, we had to turn ourselves in. We were ordered to meet at a bus parked in an open field to take a ride to a simulated POW camp. Before we came out to the field, we spent time watching PowerPoint slides. How to handle yourself as a prisoner of war. I found this absolutely fascinating, so I paid close attention. There were actual rules from the Geneva Convention that were supposed to be followed by enemy forces when they captured someone. It was confusing to me. I thought anything went in that situation. Any kind of torture would be done to get answers needed. We were only required to give our name, rank, and social security number. Any other questions, like who our team leader was, information about our country or mission, was not required. If pressed on these issues, they had a circle on the PowerPoint displayed. We were taught to talk in circles, to say a lot, but say nothing at all. It sounded like some people I already knew, and it did not seem that difficult. We were eventually ordered onto the bus, but before getting on, we were given a sack to place over our head. With a bag over our faces, they were going to transport us to the location of the prison, so we could apply the resistance techniques we learned in the classroom. I looked at the sack over my face. It looked like the material used on the three-leg sack races in elementary school. As I placed my hands on the shoulder of the person in front of me, we began to march in a way that made the airborne shuffle seem normal. It was strange. We were ordered to start with our right foot, stomping it on the ground, so the other prisoners could hear the step and walk together without seeing where we were going. It was fake, but I imagined this being a real scenario, and it seemed terrifying. I lost all ability to know where I was. It was like the games my grandfather would play with us, spinning around in circles with a blindfold on, trying to find everyone else. I thought I was facing one of the large hills on my grandfather's property, but I nailed my shin on his rock front porch. Having our eyes covered up screwed with our orientation of the world. The loud stomping at the time made me feel like I was in some kind of horror movie. As I approached the entrance to the bus, I noticed a bit of light creeping into the darkness of the sack. I took the sack and turned it so I could see if there was a hole. There was. If I looked just right, I could see everything. I heard the screaming on the bus by the instructors. They were telling people to hurry up and sit down, move quicker, and be quiet, in English and some other foreign language. I felt much better when I could see what was going on, but I tried not to be obvious with no quick head turns or acting like I knew exactly where I was. I noticed a familiar face that was yelling. Sergeant Barrington was the guy I went through orientation with on my first attempt. I didn't know him too well, but I knew he was from Portland, Oregon, and a SERE instructor. So instead of hanging out at Lackland between classes in the pipeline, he went back to his job. He played the part well. He was not a nice guy in this scenario. He was a funny guy with a dark sense of humor normally, but he had taken on the role as a hard ass from my tiny peephole. He seemed to enjoy the role I witnessed. I watched the shuffling around through my little hole and viewed the world of chaos. I was also thankful for the blemish in the sack. Through the hole, I saw the confusion of men and women totally in the dark, helpless and at the mercy of the yelling instructors. It didn't take long, maybe 5 minutes, for Barrington to stop what he was doing and walk in my direction. I was not concerned at first, but as he came closer, it was obvious he was coming for me. He quietly got in my ear as I saw him glance at my name tag on my BDUs. He spoke in a low and calm voice. He called me out. "I see you looking around." I sat there frozen, embarrassed that I had been caught. "You thought I wouldn't notice?" he asked. His voice sounded too familiar as I sat there silently. As my heart raced, he said, "You'd better stop fucking around." He yanked the bag off my head and quickly put it on another one. My world went dark. We exited the bus and did the eerie shuffle to the camp. We shuffled into our home, a living nightmare for the next 3 days. We were ordered into our living spaces that we'd spent our time in between being tortured for information used as propaganda or treated like we were not human. The spaces were the size of lockers in high school. I only knew that because I pulled my sack off my head, but we were not allowed to take them off at any point, unless instructed to. I saw the doors were metal cages and had just enough room to stand. If we sat down, we had to sit with our legs scrunched up uncomfortably. I knew I would be in this area for about 3 days, but we were ordered to stand at attention with our sack over our head for the entire stay. I took deep breaths and remained somewhat calm. In a world of darkness, I listened to the yelling of the captors to the prisoners in their rooms. A loudspeaker came on playing weird music for hours, only broken by the sound of women and children screaming. There was a coffee can in the corner of our cell for us to pee and take a crap in. If we needed toilet paper, we had to yell out and request ass paper. The door would be opened by the captors with a small strip of paper. I took my sack off my head several times, looking around the POW movie set. It was a dark space with little light. Curtains were hanging everywhere, sectioning off certain parts of the room. It reminded me of haunted houses I visited as a kid. I heard Martin's voice. "I need some ass paper." Hearing Martin ask for ass paper repeatedly through the night brought a smile to my face. Sometime late that night, I did the same. "I need ass paper." I had not taken a crap, but I found it hilarious. I heard one of the pilots next to me laugh when I asked. It was like being in middle school all over again. The insane loop played throughout the night, and I lost track of time. I reached a point of not caring anymore. I pulled the sack off my head and sat down on the floor in my cell. It felt very comfortable. I must have been standing there for around 8 hours. I drifted off to sleep while I was sitting down. I woke up in a panic. The feeling of not knowing where I was set in for a few seconds. One of the captors peered in my cell, catching me sleeping with the sack off my head. Damn, I drifted off to sleep for a while, I thought. "You want sleep?" I heard the guy ask. I was still a little confused, but as he walked away, it sank in where I was. "Fine, you can stay right there." The captor turned and walked away. It couldn't have been that easy. That whole time I could have been laying down, I thought. I don't think so. My heart was racing with the feeling of being in trouble. I heard a request for more ass paper down the hall, and then footsteps. The guy was back with a bucket. Before I could question what it was, he was dumping water with ice in it all over me. The shock of the water sent my brain into overdrive. I stood up into the attention position they had been demanding. The ice water made standing for hours in a small space seem okay again. Eventually, we were ordered to do the odd shuffle to dump our coffee cans. One hand on the shoulder of the person in front of us, the shit can in the other, as our right feet stomped in unison to some unknown location. I totally got turned around under the dark hood. Back in my cell again, I completely lost track of time, including day or night. My name was called for an interrogation. The screaming women and children became almost normal to me. The game of asking for ass paper had stopped after we asked so many times. Although I didn't want to do anything, especially an interrogation, at least I could get out of my cell. I walked with the bag over my head through the maze of curtains and walls. They had a hand on my shoulder to guide me. I heard muffled shouting through the walls, the sound of other interrogations on their way. My heart started beating a little faster, and I could feel the nervousness setting in. My hood came off, and I saw a guy of Asian descent staring at me. He looked strong and had quite a bit of extra weight on him, like guys in a strongman competition. He could have also been a bodyguard, but regardless of all that, he was staring right at me. "What's your name?" I sat there thinking back to the circle they showed us in the classroom. Name, rank, and social security number. And then talk in circles about everything else. Easy enough. "McDonald," I said, thinking that was about all I had to say. "Who's your team leader?" Well, that's not on my handy list, I thought. "I don't know," I said with confidence. "Huh?" The guy grunted as he moved closer to me. Out of nowhere, he backhanded me hard. I flew backwards out of my chair. I knew they were not supposed to hit that hard, but my brown shirt, instead of a flight suit, gave away what I was training for. I had heard the rumors that they bent the rules for special operators. I'd never been hit that hard without expecting it in my life. After the bizarre interrogation, there were other tactics they used to get information from us, like taking female navigators and pilots and making them bend backwards, arching their back uncomfortably until we would speak and give information. I tried to hang tight and I felt bad about it, but they didn't get much information from me. After SERE training was finally over, I was on to the part that would scare me to death, going back to airborne school.